Thank you. Thanks for being so easy to call to get and called to order together. I would like to let Michelle know that Representative Boatman is on WebEx. I think everybody else is here in person. We are waiting on Representative Ballard. But so I have a little information from research that we will use, that we can go through while we're waiting for her. Representative Boatman, I know you're not feeling well today, and it's awfully committed of you to be online. And since you're a true freshman in the sense that this is also your first session, I will also let you know that you don't get to vote unless you're in the building. Are you in the building?
I am not in the building. I do understand that. I'm really here just to stay apprised of what's going on.
Excellent. And you do get to speak when we're having discussion. So please don't be shy. And I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So our first order of business will be to pass the minutes from Thursday. Michelle sent those out, and a motion to approve as published is coming from Chairman Getz and a second from Representative McNorton. Is there any discussion, additions, or changes? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, same sign. And the minutes are adopted. We had a wonderful, wonderful conversation about farm to table and how those apply to our schools on Thursday, and it was so fantastic. We ran out of time for research to present some of the materials that are at your desk. So Nicole, would you like to go to the podium and show us what you have for us?
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Nicole Bergman with Legislative Research. And on your desk, we have 3 documents from KLRD, and the first one I'll speak about is the single page that has green headers on it. This is essentially just some data from USDA's Farm to School Census results. KSDE referenced the Farm to School Census last week, and so there's lots of good information in that big census report. It's over 100 pages if you're curious, but I wanted to pull some of the highlights from their website documenting what the other states' participation in specifically local food being involved in school meals. And so I've highlighted Kansas on here. 57% of Kansas school food authorities, or SFAs, report serving local food in school meals. And our neighboring states are in that mid-range as well. Colorado at 68%, Missouri at 50%, Nebraska at 60%, and Oklahoma at 38%. Some of the high yield participants are Hawaii at 91%, Oregon at 85%, Vermont at 86%, Virginia at 82%, and West Virginia at 85%. And there are a couple 100% participants that are smaller territories. Just thought that was interesting. And then the second document I have has a blue header on it, tiny text. I tried to keep this to a single page, but these are bills from other states that are documented in NCSL's education legislation tracker. And these are specifically bills dealing with farm to school programs, and specifically the aspect of serving local food, because some other aspects of the program involve school gardening programs or education programs, but these are specifically the bills related to providing local food in school meals. And so there are 12 states captured here. These are from the 2026 and 2025 sessions, a few of which have been enacted, like there was one in Maine that was the local seafood in schools bill that was enacted, and another one in Maryland. So that's just for your review. And then we also wanted to provide a document from the National Farm to School Network, which I believe is an advocacy group, but they did a good job of characterizing a lot of the legislative measures that have been taken over the recent years. And so they mentioned that 30 states have introduced more than 100 farm to school related bills. And like I mentioned, those can include the school gardening and education aspects of the program. So that's why that number is higher than on the blue sheet, but that's just for your review. We wanted to make sure you had that at your disposal. Thank you.
Nicole, thank you. I, I, I would be curious to know, because I love the farm to plate model so much, and it's so wonderful for our students. I would be really curious to know, I think we spend about $3.50 or $3.55 on average for Kansas lunches. For the areas, I think Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands are a little bit of an outlier, but maybe if we could compare what we spend for our school lunches compared to some of the higher states and territories, because I noticed most of the ones that are 100% are islands, and that makes a whole lot of sense to me. But when we look at like Oregon, Connecticut, some of those higher ones, what is their cost of a school lunch average statewide? And then on the low end as well, I think Nevada and Oklahoma stand out as two of the lowest, and what we think their average school lunch price is. And see if we can, see what we can learn from that. And
Happy to look into that.
if I could make it be Christmas, we would move to a farm to plate model statewide tomorrow, but I haven't won the lottery yet. So with that, any questions for Nicole? All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Appreciate all the work that you guys do for us. So we are going to consider Senate Bill 387, and I am going to begin by having Jason explain this bill to us.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill 387 was the bill that would require school districts to verify the eligibility of students who are deemed at-risk students in the school district, and that would be their eligibility for free meals under the National School Lunch Program, which is how the term at-risk student is defined under the current finance formula. The eligibility would be verified based on written evidence of the applicant's household gross earned income or through direct certification. And any student whose eligibility could not be verified would not be considered an at-risk student for purposes of determining the school district's state aid under the finance formula. Subsection B of the bill provided additional state aid for reduced price meals for school districts to cover the cost of providing those meals. And then subsection C and D required school districts to obtain authorization from the legislature or the LCC if the legislature is not in session before they could seek authorization to participate in the community eligibility provisions under the National School Lunch Program.
Any questions for Jason? Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Who's going to verify all of this? These individual students and their families?
The bill requires the school districts to verify.
Do they have any idea how long that would take for an individual student to verify that information? No.
There's no timeline in the bill with respect to verification, but students who are not verified are not then deemed at-risk students, and I would defer to the department as to how the logistics of adjusting student counts would work.
Okay, so you can require financial disclosures from the parents in this bill.
The verification would be through written evidence submitted either as part of the National School Lunch Program or through some other method to verify household earned income.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jason? Okay, I'm going to kick off the conversation with an amendment, and we'll hand it out, and I will let Jason explain.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the balloon amendment that was just passed out would amend subsection A of the bill to be a verification of the student's eligibility to be deemed an at-risk student under the School District Finance Act, and would remove references to the National School Lunch Program under that subsection. And then the primary amendment you'll see on the attachment on page 1 is the definition section for the School Finance Act, 72-5132. And in that, in subsection C, the definition of at-risk student is being amended to strike the reference to eligibility for free meals under this National School Lunch Act and replace it with a measure of eligibility based on household gross earned income. There, that household gross earned income eligibility is based on the free meal eligibility under the National School Lunch Act, but it would not be students who are eligible for free meals. They would have to meet this income eligibility standard instead to become to be considered an at-risk student. It also includes those who qualify for free meals under the National School Lunch Act through direct certification, which isn't an income-based. That's a certification based on receipt of other public assistance and other documentation.
I see you guys reading, so I'll give you time before we have questions for Jason. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be clear. So we're rewriting the standards for how we determine an at-risk student here?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the balloon replaces the reference to just eligibility for free meals under the National School Lunch Act with the actual income guidelines used for determining such eligibility under the definition of at-risk student. So the language is different, but it is my understanding that the numbers, and I could defer to the department on this, but I believe the numbers in terms of at-risk students would remain the same for school districts.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So would this in any way affect a school's at-risk funding?
Again, Madam Chair, I would have to defer to the department, but it is my understanding that their at-risk student counts would remain the same.
Thank you.
What I was going for was when we heard the bill, there was a concern that the way we were doing it might put some money at risk. So separating the two things, I felt put us on a safer footing. Any other questions? Representative Reese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Jason, all the language that we see in the attachment for replace attachment A, how does that change the bill? Does it change the bill at all or just rewords requirements?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, most of attachment A is current law and remains unchanged under this proposed balloon. The only change to this statute is what you see there on the first page in subsection C under the definition of at-risk student. So you see existing language being struck there on the line that begins C paragraph 1, and then you see new underlined language right below that would be added to the statute to redefine what it means to be an at-risk student under the School Finance Act. All remaining language you see in attachment A is current law and is remaining unchanged under this balloon.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, Jason, the where it says eligible for free meals under the National School Lunch Act, all you did was spell out the National School Lunch out in capital letter A section.
Madam Chair, yes, the income guidelines there and that paragraph that begins with the capital A are the income guidelines under the federal statute for eligibility for free meals.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Featherston, I think you had another question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Long referenced that the department would need to verify some things. Can we hear from the department?
You would be welcome to. Frank, would you like to? Thank you.
Certainly. Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner for the Kansas State Department of Education. So I have questions too. So what it looks like to me is that a family would apply for free lunches the way they always have, and then they would have to separately apply to be considered an at-risk student. So districts would have to ask families to apply if they thought they were below 130% of the poverty level to be counted as an at-risk student. Otherwise, the only at-risk funding a district would receive is through direct certification.
Jason.
I understood that correctly.
I think that's a fairly accurate reading in conjunction with the requirements under Section 1 to verify.
And so back to the question about if districts would lose funds, we know that during the pandemic when everybody got free lunch and districts relied on a household economic survey, you get a much lower return rate. So I think districts would have a harder time getting people to fill out an application saying that they were an at-risk student.
And I'm not trying to make it harder, but I'm trying to protect. There was the issue of how many free lunch and reduced lunch applications you could audit. So this was trying to be a workaround to make sure that we did not get in trouble with the feds on that. Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Frank, would you remind us, I'm trying to not conflate two different things, but there was about 16% when it came down to it that were not direct certification. And if anywhere close to the audit was right, that was around 50% would not have, and that was to free lunch, which is different than at risk in this moment. So I'm just trying not to conflate those, but what do you project from the information that we have received around free lunch and how that attributes to at-risk funding? Do you think that 16%, and maybe how many students do you think that is? And then at what percentage do you think there's a possibility that through this check, at-risk funding would change for districts or statewide?
So according to the LPA audit, I think in 2025, there were 194,000 students that were counted as free lunch for at-risk funding. 80% of them were direct certification. 16% filled out a free lunch application and 4% filled out a household economic survey. LPA said that somewhere between 50 and 70% they found not to be eligible for the free lunch application. So if you take 60% of 16%, it's 9%. So 9% out of the 194,000 free lunch students would be that. So that's, the 16% is about 32,000 students. And some of the testimony you got last week is that when you just use the household economic survey, you see a 10 to 20% reduction in the number of at-risk, a number of applications you receive. So districts could look at a 10 to 20% decrease in at-risk funding.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. All right, if I'm looking at this, it's to verify the household gross earned income of each student is deemed an at-risk. So are we doing two different things? I guess when I'm looking at this for each child, not a unique situation, but for a family household where there's joint custody, then whose income are you going to be using? Because if it's joint custody and maybe one gets them for the week and the other one gets them for the weekend, and the child is in two households, how do we figure that one out? Are we using only one household? Because if we use two, then that creates a greater income of which the child doesn't actually receive. So I'd like to know, when we look at this, which would be the predominant household we would be using?
So that gets really tricky. In a lot of cases, there is one parent, even if there's joint custody, is the residential or the residential parent. And in that case, they may only report that one. The other thing you get into is if you have more than one household, you also have to count all the people in both households, but you only talk, should be the household in which the student resides. And even with joint custody, parents typically pick the one where they reside because that's how you determine which school they go to. That's where one of those things that, without looking at tax returns of both families and who claims the student and all those kinds of things, there's really no way for the districts to figure that out.
We had that situation, and I've mentioned several times, I was on the school board for 8 years. And as president, one of the things we had to do was kind of like set the agenda for it. And it became very difficult because people would say, well, wait a minute, but I put 60% in that household because the child is there, because of the child support I give. So this creates a real problem. I would have a real concern with how this is worded. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any estimation on how much administrative time it would take to verify all this information?
So I know that KSB reached out to districts, and there was a wide variation in the amount of time that districts said they used to verify the current free lunches, from half an hour to 2 hours per student. In this situation, you would have to this would be a completely separate application process. And so you're also looking at gross income, not current income. So, somewhere between 30 and 120 minutes per student.
Thank you.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First and foremost, I love the idea of untangling free lunch and at risk. I think that that's been a point of confusion for a long, long time. The question is, how are these things already being handled? Like, who, in the terms of split households, we just discussed that, and there is already a process for that. So who's asking for how are the parents getting the information right now to apply?
So USDA guidelines require that the districts use the information that's provided by the family. So the family tells us what's the income and how many people live in the household, so they would make that determination. If they are selected for verification, then they provide whatever that information is to corroborate that. So in that situation, the family is determining what their household size is and then report on the income on who lives in that household.
So this would be the same thing, they're just filling out 2 different forms?
So I think back to Representative Ballard's question, it's in those situations, families, it's sometimes difficult for the families to figure out what that is, because when you look at that, is that the guidelines are for one household. If you're maintaining 2 households, then numbers should go way up because you got 2 rents or 2 mortgages and 2 utilities, all those things. So it should just be the house where the student resides. Income of truly joint custody where there's no child support, because then I don't think you do that. If there's child support, then that can be counted as income. Again, we've had this question before, is that if there's inconsistent income based on child support, it would be whatever they got at the time they were filling out the application, because the application is a point in time, not an annual situation.
Right, and I've been there, done that, and filled out the forms and got free and reduced for my kids. But in this process, if we separate the 2 things, is it just the fact that if a family already knows that they need to fill something out for free and reduced, then they're also going to attach the other form? Like, it seems like the same families are going to be more or less filling out roughly the same form, and then it will go into 2 different situations where you determine whether you're good for free and reduced, and then they determine if you are truly at risk.
So the way the amendment was described is it's the same process, just decoupling it from the USDA process. So barring other guidance, we would probably look at it as following the same rules, but you have to have 2 separate applications.
Right.
So yes, if you think you qualify for free lunch, you would ask them to fill out the second application.
Okay. That seems easy enough to me. I would have filled out both. Thanks.
Representative Boatman and then Brantley.
Yes, could someone just clarify? It sounds to me like this proposed amendment would make at-risk reporting strictly the direct reporting, and then what would essentially be an opt-in method for parents.
So yes, and that's not terribly different than what it is now, because the parents opt in. If they're not directly certified, the parents opt in to applying for free lunch if they think they would be eligible. And so this would go, again, it would be similar to what districts did during the pandemic when everybody got free lunch, and then you just ask parents to fill this out, the household economic survey, which is a separate document. And again, KSDE, unless there is more guidance, so there is some place, we would probably do it the same way we've always done the household economic survey. My only point is that when districts use a household economic survey, for instance, like with CEP programs, there is typically a lower return rate.
Do you have a follow-up, Representative Boatman?
No, I guess I just well, yeah, I do. What would be, going back to the earlier rep's comments on the decoupling, how much extra paperwork is this for parents and schools?
So for the parents, you would have to fill out 2 separate forms. The forms are not particularly long, but it takes a little bit of time to do that. For the districts, the difference would be for the food service, for the free lunch applications, you verify 3% or 3,000, whichever is less. And for this, you'd have to do 100%, which would be, from best guess right now, 32,000 statewide.
Thank you.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for answering these questions. Could you clarify, will all parents have to fill out the forms again, or is that pretty much routine at enrollment time with some pre-qualifying through other resources?
So in a lot of cases, just during regular enrollment paperwork, I mean, districts provide the free lunch application to everybody because you don't know and you shouldn't know, so you're just asking. So they would provide both forms, and it would be a matter of filling out both forms during enrollment, or at some other point if their household income or their changes to their income or family numbers.
You have a follow-up? Go ahead.
So if they qualify for SNAP and such, would they still fill this out?
So they would not need to, because if you're directly certified, then you're still getting counted as directly certified. So that'd be SNAP, TANF, foster, homeless, migrant. So that list would be the same. The problem is that the district, when they send out the enrollment information, they don't know that. So it typically gets sent out to everybody. So there are people that qualify for SNAP that fill out the free lunch applications anyway. They just get shredded and you move on because they weren't necessary. But districts typically have that information in the enrollment packet for every student.
Representative McNorton.
This is actually for the reviser. So Jason, the amendment we're talking about right here at the first few sentences on page 1 is not going into all the detail we're discussing here about how they're going to do it and how long it will take. It's just stating out what an at-risk student is. Or we're going to spell out what that is on 130% or the free meals under the National School Lunch Act. Am I missing something? I guess I'm a little confused on our discussions here as we're getting off the amendment.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, so under the proposed amendment, the first line would be each school year, each school district shall verify that each student who is deemed an at-risk student by such school district satisfies the requirements of the definition of an at-risk student, and they do so either through direct certification or based on written evidence of the student's household gross earned income. And I think the discussion has been on the logistics of how a district is going to verify students who are deemed at risk and how they would verify they satisfy the definition of at-risk student as proposed under the amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Featherston.
Sorry, I really appreciate your indulgence. This is for staff. So if the original fiscal note was $300,000 and now we have 2 forms that the district has to go through, do you have an idea what that's going to do to the fiscal note?
Jason.
Madam Chair, we do not have a new fiscal note for the balloon. We don't get fiscal notes for proposed amendments.
Is it reasonable to think it would double since the number of forms doubled?
I'm not going to speculate, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Staff really doesn't have a way to know that. What I was going for was when we heard the original testimony and it was said you could put the free lunch dollars at risk by verifying more than of the percentage that you're allowed to verify under federal law, that we could take a hit and so on. And I really wanted to protect our free and reduced lunch money. So I just came up with this as an option that does what the original bill said it would do, but safeguards free lunch. Yes, you would have more forms for those who aren't direct certified, but you were going to have to go through that 16% anyway. So I don't have an estimate on that. My motivation is to protect free lunch. Any other questions? Representative Stogsdill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess the thing that bothers me in this is in the second line there where it says school districts to verify the household gross earned income. If they're handing in these forms and you're essentially not taking the word of that family, you're having to verify that. Is that going to require them to bring in their tax returns or checkbooks or whatever it is to verify that that this information is accurate?
Well, that's part of the original bill, and I'm not touching that with this amendment.
It just seems like it would be terribly intrusive on administrative time to go in and verify all of these people that are handing in these forms and so on. If it was just the forms, I think I'd be fine with it, but if they have to verify this, then I would hate to see how you would interpret that through school districts, but.
And that's in the base bill, not the amendment, because the amendment is to try to protect free and reduced lunch. Any other questions? I would move my amendment, and a second would be in order if someone would like to second my amendment. Second by Representative Brantley. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I close my amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. And the amendment carries. It's my understanding other people have amendments. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have an amendment. Jason gets it passing out. The CEP program is a program that's put on by the federal government, and because of that, I would like to strike sections C and D of this bill, so that would be on page 2, striking all of lines 8 through 23, mainly because I don't want to put any of our free meals at risk for those that already are participating in the program.
Jason, would you like to add anything to that explanation?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, no, it simply strikes all of subsection C and D on page 2 with respect to seeking pre-authorization to apply for the community eligibility provisions under the National School Lunch Act.
And Representative Steele, that was a motion?
Yes, ma'am, I do make a motion to move the amendment.
And you have a second from Representative Getz. Questions and discussion on the amendment? Representative Getz and then Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to speak briefly in favor of this. I don't necessarily think the CEP needs to be in this bill. And so that's why I agree with the content of this amendment, just striking it out of it. And it, somewhat we heard from the reviser, just that it is a federal program, and this was putting us kind of in between that federal program, and I didn't necessarily think that was correct of us to do, so I support the amendment.
Thank you. Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm trying to read it. May I ask the maker of this amendment 11 through 13, would you please explain it to me?
Representative Steele.
Madam Chair, Representative, this amendment would strike all of that.
But why?
Because the CEP program is more of a federal level program, and trying to make state law for federal level programs, my concern was that we would be putting that funding potentially at risk for those schools that are already CEP schools, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
You may not have been here when we heard the bill, and so basically the bill would have districts come to this legislature for permission, and this removes that, leaves the authority with the districts.
That's why. Thank you very much for answering my question. That's why it was.
Madam Chair Representative, no, it doesn't. This amendment would just keep the CEP programs how they currently operate in the schools with the state board and the schools and how they currently operate.
Jason, did you, okay. Any other questions regarding the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I close.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. And the motion passes. Are there any more amendments? Representative Brantley.
Let Jason pass that out. Madam Chair, as we've talked about SB 387, we've talked about how to verify income for the free and reduced lunches. As I looked at some of the things, a 1040 would make common sense because it is a common document that we would have. It's used in FAFSA, it's used in SNAP, it's used in childcare as you apply for all different services, and it would just be kind of a standard document. I'll let Jason explain.
Jason.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, this amendment would specify that the evidence of a student's household gross earned income would be evidenced by the Form 1040 on the federal income tax return filed by the student's parent or person acting as parent. And then it also provides if no Form 1040 is submitted, then other documentation may be used as evidence of household gross earned income by the school district. And this would be on top of the first amendment that was adopted, would just fit with that language that was first adopted by the committee.
So Jason, this would be a way to hopefully automate and reduce what it takes to verify the income.
Madam Chair, I believe it provides direction to the school districts in terms of the written evidence of household income by reference to the Form 1040.
Okay, thank you. Representative, was that a motion for your amendment? And is there a second to that amendment? Representative Steele. And then I have questions from Representative Featherston. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So who's turning in this 1040?
Representative Brantley.
I think like Dr. Harwood said, they would determine who, and I'm just going on my personal experience, who the residential custody was, then I would file that, but that would be up to the department, I believe, unless Jason has some clarification on that.
Yes.
So if I'm the parent, I'm supposed to now turn in assuming I'm not direct certified, I'm supposed to turn in my free reduced lunch form, my at-risk funding form, and my 1040.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, yes. And when you fill out the SNAP and such, I'm understanding that it's only like the front page, so it's not the whole document.
I think when regulations are made, I think the point is for the state board and the districts to maybe find a way to automatically match. So that helps to catch people who may not get the form back in. So, or turn in paperwork, but they could work with the Department of Revenue to look at 1040s and see who would qualify and make a match and simplify that and reduce the amount of paperwork that we need. So I think it's a savings step, in my opinion. Did you have a follow-up?
So then how many more full-time employees are we going to need to manage this?
Well, I think that would reduce because you could run a match on a computer, and that could that could help to narrow down a lot.
Department of Revenue?
I'm sorry?
In the Department of Revenue?
Well, for the Department of Education. So, Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is for the reviser. Not that I'm against this amendment, but we've heard all the time this is a snapshot in time that qualifies them. Can a 1040 form from previous year's income, which one do we need to use?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the balloon doesn't specify which year's Form 1040 would be submitted, but I believe it would be assumed to be the most recent federal Form 1040 that was filed by the taxpayer.
If I could.
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if we use a 1040 form, we're looking at a year-long income. Instead of, we've heard over and over again, this is a snapshot of their income in September. So are we stepping outside of the federal guideline with the 1040 form, is my question. Or
Representative Brantley.
I think Frank can probably, Dr. Harwood can answer this. And I believe I'll let him answer.
So, Frank Harwood, Department of Education. So the Department of Education and the school districts have no access to Department of Revenue documents. And so from my hearing of this, the family would have to turn in their 1040. I didn't see anything in this bill that gives the State Board of Education the authority to make regulations to have this happen. So if it says 1040, that's the whole thing. I mean, if you want to add language that says the department can make rules to make it work, then maybe we could do something with that. However, the other part about this is that this says the districts shall verify, so KSD doesn't have any part in this. And so if you're going to use the Department of Revenue, you would have to do something to give the Department of Revenue or the school districts access to Department of Revenue records. So the next part would be is if you're using a 1040, when somebody is applying in August of 2026 as an at-risk for 26-27, state law says that is as of September 20th of 2026. So you're going to have to use a 1040 that is 9 months old in order to verify that income. And whereas the question about a point in time, that is true for the federal free lunch. You can apply for a federal free lunch at any point during the year. So if you lose your job, you can apply for free lunch in May and just get that for the rest of the school year. In this case, at-risk is determined based on eligibility on September 20th of each year.
Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Harwood. I think if you look at the amendment, you're going to strike line 19, but it says then bring the 1040 federal income tax return filed by such student's parents or acting parent, and you're going to take that to the school to verify. It is a snapshot, but if you file even like a FAFSA or another grant or such, you're filing at that time and then moving forward. But this is just a snapshot for that moment.
Okay. The other thing that I see when I look here is if no 1040 is submitted, then other documentation can be submitted. So I think that leaves room if a family has lost their income during the course of the year, they still have that ability to apply as they go. We do have several representatives with questions, so I will go to Representative Pishney, then Boatman, and Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I spoke to this briefly when we had the hearing on this bill. I'm in favor of the motion of using the 1040, and I'm in the process of doing tax returns for several family members as we speak. And anytime I borrow money from a bank, I am required to bring in a 1040, and it may be 9 months old. Now, my only concern would be if there is something that puts this in violation of current statutes, federal or state, but I'm not aware that it would because it's already being used for grants, as the presenter of this amendment has said. And yes, it is a snapshot in time. It may be out of date, but then there will be the next time around that it'll be corrected with the next 1040. So I'm absolutely in favor of this amendment.
Thank you, Representative Pishney. Representative Boatman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of interested to see where we were going when the First Amendment was proposed, and I guess I see now. I feel like the aggregate effect of all of these amendments is really to make it more difficult for at-risk families to access benefits that they should have through public school. I have a problem with the 1040, not only because on one hand, we're saying it's a snapshot in time, and now we're talking about a snapshot in time that's perpetually 9 months behind, because even though like the the earlier representative said that it would be up to date the next time he filed, it wouldn't. It would just mean that it's another 9 months behind, the same 9 months behind for the following school year. I also think that if a single filer makes less than $15,000, they're not actually required to file taxes. So that brings up what forms you need to turn in if you don't have a 1040. And I don't have the amendment in front of me, so I can't read it. So I don't know if there's other forms that are specified or not. But this seems to be going the wrong direction. I don't support this amendment. Thank you.
Since you don't have it in front of you, one of the balloons to the outside says, if no Form 1040 is submitted, then other documentation may be submitted as evidence of household gross earned income. And that is phrased rather openly, which I think gives more flexibility. And I think I was misunderstanding your amendment, so I back off what I said about Department of Revenue, although it kind of makes sense to explore that as a possibility in the future. Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As somebody who has had free and reduced lunch family and at-risk family in my own family, we already had to have the 1040. We already had to have that for SNAP benefits. We already had to have that for medical benefits. We already had to have that on hand for those things when we applied to those things. So the 1040 is not a big deal. It's not a far stretch. And that does mean that someone else has already verified that you do qualify. It would make it a whole lot easier for our districts to look at that, understand that by federal, you have already qualified. That puts you into the pile of, I don't need to chase rabbits on that one. These people have already qualified. All of that being said, the fact that the maker of the amendment also added in that if you don't submit your 1040, then you can use the other verifying documents. I think that that covers everything. I am in full support of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Getz, and then Ballard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This might be a question for Jason, possibly for Frank, but just the precedent around, and I know about the 3% on the free and reduced that they can check, and just some of the how they're going about that. But then in this, bringing in a tax form to me is kind of a new privacy area that we're entering. And then the other that is just maybe the overarching bothersome to me on this bill overarchingly is just our funding formula is very interconnected, and this is just something that as I've thought on this bill as we were approaching this day, handling this inside the funding formula where this can be, a couple months of conversation around, okay, we do want to verify more of the at-risk dollars. what is the right mechanism? How could that work? I mean, if we were going to go over the funding formula 5 years from now, this is something that I would lean into and say, okay, we do need to do something, and this is our opportunity. But we have even a larger opportunity to, adjust the overarching funding formula in all its interconnected ways just next year. And so, anyway, I just wanted to make those statements. But I guess the question still remains, what is the precedent around checking other dollars that are really kind of in-state dollars on checking income? Do we do that anywhere else in the funding formula? And then how is the privacy of that tax return? I know a bank would have to be very private with that. And is that a financial officer that has a certain license? I mean, at a bank, that there is kind of that privacy practice built in because they're handling that sort of documents every day. A school is really handling education. They are handling some funding side, but that's kind of my questions. I know they're roundabout, but what is the precedent around dollars and checking, and then what is the privacy practices around that inside of a school?
Jason?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I am not aware off the top of my head of other statutory provisions requiring income verification as it relates to students enrolled in public schools. This is the eligibility for national school lunch for free meals is, I believe, the only income-based necessarily provision. With respect to your second part of your question on the confidentiality of the records, it's my understanding that because it is tied to the student who is deemed at risk, that those documents would be part of the student's records held by the school district, and therefore I would believe they would be protected under the Student Data Privacy Act and held confidential with respect to their other educational records in that respect. I would defer to the department if they have guidance to the contrary with respect to free meal applications that are currently received by students.
Dr. Harwood, did you want to add anything to that?
So I guess I would start with, I would say that school districts are really good about keeping information private because they do that a lot. I will say they also typically don't want any information they don't have. I would have to go back and look. I don't think a parent's 1040 would be considered a student record, so it probably doesn't cover it under FERPA because I don't know if it ever became one. All of the confidentiality for the free lunch applications are covered under USDA guidelines because that's why you collect them. So I mean, I believe that school districts would keep information secure, and they could do that. I would also say that providing a 1040 would be one more reason why somebody would not fill out this form. And so I think that would decrease even further the number of at-risk applications a district receives from eligible students, eligible families.
Does that answer your question?
It does, and I mean, my only follow-up to that is I also think it kind of, I mean, we're doing this for one weighting. And how many weightings do we have? Exactly. If he can't, just like that, there's several. And so we're also setting a precedence around if we have to verify some sort of income or some sort of eligibility on this weighting, how much further is that going to go? So it's not that I disagree with this approach. I just don't know that we fully comprehend how much stuff this is going to touch. And that raises a concern and maybe a better part for a broader conversation in the funding formula. Still up in the air where I'm going to go with this, but thank you for your response.
To kind of complete that from some questions we got last week, there were for fiscal year 25, there were a little over 265,000 students eligible for at-risk services with state funds, 194,000 free lunch students. And so as I talked about before, in 2017, when the current state school funding formula was passed, the legislature was well aware of this situation, and they chose to use it anyway. So changing that is a philosophical shift in the funding formula. And as I said last week as well, that maybe that does take place during the funding task force, which has already been talking about the same topic for the last 11 months.
Thank you. I have Representative Ballard still, Schmoy, and Stogg still. Representative Ballard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask the representative who had indicated that she had filled out free and reduced lunches, would she think this was easy or not? But she's already kind of stated that she was in favor of it, so she answered my question. So what I would say, will this bill satisfy, what we need to verify household income? Okay, that would be part of it. And in doing so, will it do what I think is most important, that hungry children get to eat at school? So I think whatever we decide on, regardless of how we go about to verify household income, so quote, that they're not fraudulently eating, my interest really is, will hungry children get to eat meals at school? Because that should be the ultimate goal, is to make sure that they are eating regardless of the status of their parents, their family. And I'm not sure that this would guarantee that, and that's where we really should be. Will they get to eat? Instead of all the formality to put something in place. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Steele?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think some issues regarding the whole privacy issue is that a school is essentially a government entity, and there's no different than a local health department or wherever someone goes for their SNAP benefits, their Medicaid benefits, or anything. They're turning the same information over to those government entities. And so the concern about privacy and things, to me, isn't there, because there's other government entities that have that and more information on a student. And I understand the previous representative's concern about the funding formula, but we have had 3 post-audits that have all deemed that there is an issue with this specific weighting. And I think it would behoove us to, as a legislature, to take a look at it and really try to see what we can do. We need to be accountable to our taxpayer funds, and I think that this is an excellent way, and I support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Representative Schmoy.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Clearly, it hits pretty close to home for me. This is for the reviser. Just to clarify, when it says if no 1040 is submitted, then other documents may be submitted as evidence, that means that the 1040 isn't required to be sent, but that a family could include it to show that they have already been verified by the federal government, correct?
Representative Schmoy, when you mean already verified by the federal government for other public assistance?
Yes.
Then the student has probably been directly certified and would not need to submit any written evidence of household income. If they aren't directly certified, this amendment directs school districts to look for a Form 1040 tax return to verify that income. If a Form 1040 is not submitted by the parent, then other documentation may be submitted and used, but I believe that would be up to the school district that is verifying the household income as to what other documentation they would be willing to accept for verification.
But this does state that the 1040 is not required.
It is not an absolute mandate, no, but it's up to the school district as to what documentation it would accept as verification of household income.
All right, thank you very much.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have obviously watched way too many episodes of FBI because I'm thinking what we're trying to do here obviously is to get rid of the fraud in this program. And so if you have people that are already willing to submit fraudulent forms, the two forms, the original forms, and then need to submit a 1040, it is awfully easy to just take a 1040 off the internet, fill it out fraudulently, and hand it in with the other two fraudulent forms that you've already filled out. So I don't see where the 1040 is really, you're already going to have to, then you have to verify the verification. I mean, you know, having the 1040 come in, if they're willing to do the criminality to begin with, what's to keep them from doing that, just filling out a fraudulent 1040? You have to verify the 1040 then? So anyway, I'm going to stop watching the FBI.
I don't have anybody else in the queue to speak. Oh, Representative Boatman and then Representative Featherston.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think the two previous representatives' comments kind of demonstrate that I feel like this amendment is missing the mark that it's intending to hit. Just based on the fact that 80% of people are already directly qualified. So we're really focusing on 9% of people who get these lunches. And the other reason I say I think it misses the mark is because this whole conversation started out with, we just take the parents' words for it. And without elucidating further what the quote unquote other documentation may be, I think we find ourselves really right at the start where we were. And so I understand what we're trying to do here, but I think this amendment falls short of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to agree with the representative from Dodge City. At-risk funding is very complex and should be studied in detail. We are not only not in detail here, we weren't even through the normal committee process. We're in the amendment process where there's very little time to assess what's going on. I think we are opening a whole big can of worms. And then my secondary thought is you're going to have some school secretary with piled 1040s on her desk. That is a recipe for disaster.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To echo off Representative Getz, if we're worried about verifying, if you remember when we were hearing this bill, Representative King, the state already has this information someplace. Somebody does, the Department of Revenue, that somebody has this information on file already. So, you know, if we want to go and verify, going back to Representative Stockdale's point, somebody has that in official capacity, and I think we ought to lean on that information instead of relying on a 1040 somebody brings in, because that is already there. And if we're going to go that way, I would rather lean that way, that we go to another department of the state, already has that information, and they are the ones verifying instead of the school district. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Anybody else like to speak to the amendment? Representative Brantley, you may close.
I close.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. The chair is in doubt. Representative Boatman, you're not here. You don't get to vote. All those in favor, please raise a hand clearly for me. And all those who would like to vote no. I see 10 in favor and 6 against. Did that match what you guys got, Elena? Okay, very good. The amendment passes. Are there any other amendments? Okay, then we go to the bill as amended. Any discussion? Seeing none, would somebody like to move the bill as amended? Representative Brantley?
Madam Chair, I move that we pass SB 387 as amended out of committee.
And is there a second? Representative Steele? And last call for discussion. Representative Brantley, you may close.
I close.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. No. The chair is in doubt. Again, Representative Boatman, you don't get to vote, and we'll start with the yeses. Okay, I'm a yes. Did you get 9? Okay. And those voting no? I show 9 for and 6 against. Does that match you, Representative Norton? Okay. Representative Featherston would like to record. Anybody else? As a no, Featherston, Ruiz, Ballard, Stogstill. Okay, that concludes our business, but I will kind of address the rest of the week. You'll see on the agenda, we do have a bill that we're hearing tomorrow, and of course, on the days that I don't get to give you much notice, we are more flexible with getting in testimony. Michelle, was that 361? Yeah, okay, 361, thank you. And on Thursday, we're waiting for the referral for 382. And we have above the line in the Senate today 339, which is a K through 12 daily recess bill. And I am very likely to put that on Thursday or Monday if it does pass the Senate. I'd like to thank you all for your thoughtful comments today and for the hard work that you did. Thank you.